Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are connecting. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I see people joining in. We're going to give it a minute before we start so more people can join. Um, I'm very happy to be moderating this webinar. I am Giovanna Sessa, research manager at the EU DisinfoLab, and I am sure that many of you already know us and perhaps are even regular attendees of our webinars. Anyways, we are a nonprofit organization gathering knowledge and expertise on disinformation in Europe. And we organize these webinars almost on a weekly basis in order to give voice to experts in our community, to share knowledge, to raise awareness around the excellent and abundant work that is done by so many of you. We might have met in person a few weeks ago in Ljubljana during our annual conference. So I take the opportunity to let you know that the slides from the speaker's presentation who accepted to share them and also some photos from the event are available on our website. And we do all hope to see you all in Vilnius next year. All right, since we are already a few, back to our webinar today, I need to share some housekeeping rules before we begin. As you might have noticed, this webinar is being recorded and it will be uploaded on our YouTube channel and website. We have a captions and translation function, so you can click on CC at the bottom of your screen and enable the translation option, selecting your desired language. And we're going to have, as usual, a Q&A section after the presentation via Slido. We're not going to use Zoom chat, so please connect to Slido. You can use the QR code on the screen, or you can go to slido.com and enter the code disinfo. And I really encourage everyone to already connect to Slido and to submit their questions anytime as they might come up during the presentation, so we can return to them after the presentation is over. You don't need to wait until the end. You can already start asking them. To get you familiarized with the tool, we are going to ask a first question out of two, which is, where are you joining us from today? Both myself and our speaker are based in Italy, so what about you? Brussels, of course, New York, Helsinki, Ukraine, Vienna, a lot of different places. That's amazing. Brussels is a big one. Stockholm, the Netherlands, Seattle, Berlin, Bucharest. Amazing. Such a diverse crowd. A lot of American colleagues, London, more from the UK. That's fantastic. Keep them coming. And in a second, I think we're also going to move on to the next and last question. So you can graduate from Slido officially, which is, what sector do you represent? And we have people from academia, from civil society like ourselves, from international institutions, but also the business sector, which is great. So yes, quite also a diverse crowd, not just in terms of location, but also of occupation. And we're very happy and proud of these diversity. And I'm happy to announce that we are more than 50 participants at the moment. So now let's really delve into the topic of today. Weaponizing the past, historical disinformation as a tool to legitimate aggressive politics. As you can see from the title, this is a very exciting presentation that is going to look at the past to also resonate with the present. And we will explore how history and archaeology have been manipulated to justify political aggression. Our speaker will bring historical examples to examine how distorted interpretations of the past serve to legitimize violence, to create enemies, and to strengthen authoritarian power. And with us today is Chiara Torrisi. She is an historical researcher and editor working with writers and creators to craft history into accurate and engaging stories. She has a background in archaeology, and her expertise in storytelling have led her to focus on research into how historical narratives shape collective identities and how they can be politically manipulated by authoritarian regimes. Chiara, a very warm welcome and thank you to you. I will now leave you the floor, and I will see you later for the Q&A. See you in a bit.
Thanks, Maria. Now I'm sharing the slides. Okay, so welcome to everybody. Today I want to talk about historical disinformation from a specific point of view, that is the use of history to legitimate political violence. So first of all, why power is so interested in history? This is because history creates a memory, and the memory is what shapes our own identity as a group of people. And so usually when the power wants to have control on people, they usually want also to have control on the narration that creates this kind of identity. And so when we talk about historical narration manipulated by authoritarian regimes, we can find some recurring patterns. So these kind of narratives are built on emotions, especially fear, because fear is one of the most powerful emotions. These narratives simplify very complex issues, and this is true especially when it comes to archaeological topics, because usually these topics are very complicated, especially for people who don't have an archaeological background. But these kind of narratives simplify everything, and so everyone can grab it, and they have the idea that everything is much easier than the reality. And these narratives also want to create a sense of belonging. And this sense of belonging is also a mindset that creates a division between us and them. And this is very convenient when the power want to create and clearly define internal and external enemies. Internal enemies are people who are already in the state, while the external enemies are other countries, for example. And so they can justify wars, for example. To give us some examples of how history can be manipulated by power, I decided to share with you 3 examples. One example is want to show how history can be used to go against internal enemies, while the other 2 examples are related to history to justify wars. So the first example is taken from Nazi history. And to start, it's important to have an idea of what was the Nazi ideology about. A core concept of the Nazi ideology was the idea of the race, and especially Nazi ideology wanted to had an idea that the Germanic, or better, the Nordic race was a pure race. And what does it mean, a pure race? A pure race means that people are strong and powerful. In contrast, when foreign elements start to mingle with a pure race, this is very dangerous, because these foreign elements leads to the destruction of the race. And so a mixed race means no race. And when we understand this, we understand how defending the purity of the race was for them a fight for survival. So how this theory, what are the practical application of this theory? In politics, it means to fighting foreign elements that are already in the state, and also the one who support these elements that are, and these people are considered by Nazis traitors, because for them they are putting in danger the community. And how history can help this political action? Well, history, and especially archaeology, should prove that this Nordic race was pure. They should prove the racial purity. And also, archaeology should prove that this coexistence between races is impossible. And to let you understand how strictly connected was the research and the politics, here I'm sharing an organogram of the police during the Nazi regime. Here it was before the Second World War, and here it was the same structure during the war. Here we can see Himmler, that he was the leader of the police, and here we can see the Gestapo, the notorious political police. But what's interesting for us is that there are other sections that are related to research. And for research, I mean academic research, because in German, Forschung means academic research. And so here we can see Gegenwarforschung, that means research against the enemies. And these enemies were Masonry, Jews, and political churches. And here there is another section that is that wanted to control the daily life of the Germans, and there is a section that is dedicated to culture. And so we can see how in the police department there were sections that are dedicated to do research. And for us, it's nonsense that police must do this kind of research, but for them it was perfectly normal and logical, because the final goal of the culture was to identify the enemies, understand the enemies, so that the other section, the other police sections, could eliminate the enemies. So there is a very strict connection between culture and politics. So how can history help this narration? History, and especially archaeology, should prove that the Nordic race was pure. And to do it, archaeologists have to ignore some archaeological findings that they found in excavations, because, for example, something that the Nazi regime wanted to deny was the influences that the Slavs had on some territories at the border in the eastern Germany, because it was a border territory. So there was a mix of elements, of cultural elements, but they didn't want to show these influences, and so they had to ignore every element that could prove that there was a mix of different cultural and different influences. Another point was that this is true, especially for historians. Historians cannot highlight how important was the role of culture in shaping the German identity. And this has a very practical application if we consider the reality of the 20th century German, because, for example, if there was thinking of the Jews, even if they have been in Germany for centuries, and even if they consider themselves German and they share the same culture, the same values, still they could never be a real part of the community, because they have a different ethnic background, and so they will always be foreigners. And not only foreigners, but for Nazi ideology, they'll always be a danger, because we've seen that when there are a mixed race, so when there are foreign elements that can create a mixed race, it leads to the destruction of the race. And this is something that the Nazi regime thought that archaeology shown very well. And to understand this, we need to think about an idea that was very common at the end of the 19th century, and it was that, especially between the nationalist circles, and it was that for every archaeological culture was related to a specific race, a specific ethnicity. And so when they saw clear differences in an archaeological culture, so for example, very different burial customs, very different pottery, they thought that there was another people who came and replaced the original people. And so they thought that every big changes in archaeology meant an ethnic replacement. And so we can see how these are connected to, it was a very convenient proof for their ideology. The second example is again from the Nazi history, but this time it shows how history can justify war. And in this case, the war is the war against the war in Eastern Europe. Their theory was that the land belongs to the first people who inhabited it. And since they say that there were Germanic people who inhabited the Eastern Europe before the Slavs, so their descendants, the modern Germans, could reclaim these lands by force. And why cannot they just simply migrated in these lands and live together with the other population? This is impossible because they thought that the coexistence of two races it was just not possible, as we've already seen, because the only path were or the creation of a mixed race, and so the annihilation of both the races, or a violent migration and the annihilation of the original population. And so this theory, the application in politics is the war in Eastern Europe. And history can help to justify this war, proving that these lands were once inhabited by Germanic population. And this is true. Were there really Germanic peoples in the East? Well, the answer is yes, because especially in the 3rd and the 1st century, the Goths inhabited the modern day Ukraine. And not only, but in the 1st century, the Goths were able to create a so-called Gothic empire. And I say so-called because we cannot really talk about empire if there is not a state. And at this time, the Goths had a tribal society, so we cannot really talk about an empire. It was a confederation of people where and the Goths were the leader of this confederation. So they had some relationship, especially commercial relationships with other people. And so this is true. Where is the manipulation here? The manipulation happens again when the archaeologists refuse to see the elements that prove that there were influences from other people in the Gothic culture. And this is very evident because all these area for centuries has been a very big melting pot. And also the Goths adopted a lot of traditions from other people, like the people from the steppe. And we can find these traces in the findings that we can find in excavations, but also in other elements. For example, there are very clear elements related to the steppe tradition in the Germanic saga. If you know something about the Nibelungslied, now we know that some of the traditions that we read in this saga have a lot of similarities with traditions from other people that come from the steppe. And again, the manipulation happens when they read the Greek and Latin sources, but they only want to highlight the sources that seems to prove their own thesis. And another thing that it's important to understand the aggression and the invasion of the Eastern Europe is that from the end of the 19th century, German nationalists start to think of Germans as a folk ohne Raum. That means people without space. They thought that the Germans were too many, they needed space to enlarge. And so where they could go to find these lands. They thought that a perfect place could be Eastern Europe, not only because in the past there were the Goths and even before other Germanic tribes in this place, but also because they consider Eastern Europe Raum ohne Volk. That means a place without people. But how is it possible that there are no people? There were the Slavs here. But for them, the Slavs were a mixed race. And so a mixed race is a no race. And not only, but for them, for them, the Slavs were an artificial identity. So, in fact, this was almost a place where there are no people, so that it would be perfect for them to expand and to conquer and then colonize these lands. The last example is a contemporary example, but still here history plays a very important role. And this is the case of the Russian war in Ukraine. And so the Russian propaganda and the Russian theory behind the war is that Russia must protect the Russian-speaking minorities from that are endangered by the Nazi government on Ukraine. And this label of Nazi is very important, as we'll see later. And so they think that since the enemy wants to destroy people, war is the only answer. They have to defend themselves. And so the practical actions in politics is a preemptive war, a war to, or better, a spatial operation, as they call it, to prevent the extermination of these minorities. And what history can do in this case? History can prove that Russia has always been on the good side in history, especially in the Second World War. And to understand why the Second World War is so important for Russians, we need to understand how it is called, because in Russian, it is not called a world war, but it's called a Great Patriotic War. Because for them, the Second World War was basically the fight between the Soviet Union alone against the Nazism. And this is very important in the contemporary Russian identity, because now for a Russian is to be an anti-Nazi. But this also means that the opponents to Russians are Nazi. And this is why these labels is so recurring in contemporary propaganda. And this is very easy for Russian propaganda to label the Ukrainian government as Nazi, also because they in the past, in the Second World War, there were some people who collaborated, some Ukrainian people who collaborated with the Nazis. And so they label all the Ukrainian as Nazi. But not only, history must also prove that the Soviet Union before and now Russia have always been on the good side. And so they want to prove that the Soviet Union never invaded anyone. They never did crimes in war. And this is a real manipulation of history, because first, they deny the existence of the secret protocols of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact signed in the 1939. And with these secret protocols, they divided the Eastern Europe between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. Then they want to erase the crimes that the Soviet Union did in the occupied lands. For example, the Katyn massacres, the rapes in the lands. They are very infamous. The rapes in Berlin in April 1945. And with this, they also want to, they really want to show that the Soviet Union fought alone during the war, and they want to depict the Western allies as unreliable and in a sort even almost as traitors, because they say that the Soviet Union was left alone in fighting. And this is true that the USA and the UK never sent the soldiers on the Eastern Front, but it was not true that they didn't help at all the Soviet Union, because they, with the Lend-Lease, they sent a lot of aids to the Soviet Union. Aids in form of weapons, trucks, food, raw materials, and it was fundamental for the Soviet Union to resist this violent aggression by the Nazi and the fascist coalition. Also because the Germans occupied regions where were located a lot of factories, and so without these helps from the West, would have been very, very difficult, maybe even impossible for the Soviet Union to resist as it did. And this doesn't mean that they didn't suffer incredible losses and they hadn't to face extreme violence by the Nazis, but it's not true that they were totally alone. But still, this is the narratives that we find in the school textbooks. And after the invasion of Ukraine, there were even it's even more the state it's even more interested in controlling the textbook and how the history is taught in schools. And what is very interesting is that the Second World War plays a very big role in these books, because they really want to show the Soviet Union as the one who saved the world, and they never did anything bad. They never invaded anyone, and they never did any crime. So after we've seen these three examples, we can ask ourselves a question. And so, are these historical narratives dangerous? Because we see that these historical narratives create an identity, a national identity, but they are also a very useful tool for extremist or authoritarian regimes, a very useful tool to create divisions, to find an enemy, and in the most extreme cases, even to justify genocides. And so this is, of course, something very problematic and very dangerous. And so, is there a solution to avoid this misuse of historical narratives? Well, some people think that a solution could be to erase the differences, to erase the idea of national identities. Also because national identities are artificial. And for artificial, it means that they are created by humans, by people. And unless we think that our nation, our people is created by a god or by the nature itself, of course, every nation, every national identity is made by humans. But the idea of erasing the national identities is not only very complicated, but it is also dangerous, because we as humans, we need to identify in something. We need a group identity. And so getting rid of it leave just space for another identity. And it's easy to imagine that the answer to such an extremist position could be something even more extremist. So this is not really a solution. What we should do, and we could do, is to try to understand the patterns that are behind these violent narratives. And so to understand that these narratives want to talk to our belly. They want to share stories that touch our emotions. They don't try to make us think. They want to lead us to be irrational. And so when we are able to analyze these narratives in this way, we can understand that when there is a danger, we are scared. And when we are scared, we are irrational. And when we are so scared that we feel that our own existence is put in danger by an enemy, that his only goal is to destroy us, we just want to be safe, to feel safe. And what we think is that maybe we need a very powerful leader that can protect us. And this is the main path that leads to authoritarianism. So when we understand this, we are able to deconstruct these narratives. We are more able to resist these kind of narratives. And so as a society, how can we fight this historical disinformation? Well, the first thing that we should do as a society is to keep the research independent, because when the state want to have control on university and on research centers, this is always a very big warning for us, because this is one of the first step to control the people. And so this is absolutely necessary to always keep the research independent and free. Then the society should also face our own country dark past, because every nation has a dark past. It's impossible to always have been on the good side. And this is very important, to face our own dark past, because when we know this, when we know it, we are more able to understand the context where we live, and also resist the myth that we are always the good ones. The blame is always on other people, and so it's easier to resist to this kind of narratives. And connected to this, there is also the refusal of the logic of what I call once for all, because we've seen in these examples how it's important for these kind of violent narratives to show that one part has always been good and the other part has always been evil. And it's very important for them to have these once for all narratives, because if you are aware that if you have done something good in the past, it's not automatically that you will always be good forever, and also on the contrary. And this is very important for these kind of violent narratives to insist on this point, because when you are aware that people can change, so it's possible to negotiate with people and to find a solution that doesn't imply the violence, but they want to instead they want to this kind of narration. And the last point is the simplest, and maybe it sounds even too basic, but this is maybe the most important one, because when we to resist to these narratives that are also very attractive, because they keep everything simple in a very complex world, and we should sometimes we really want that we would like that the world is really simple and not as complex as it is. And so to resist to these narratives, we need to to insist on find what is human in what these narratives depict as evil enemies. We need to find every time the humanity in other people, because when we do it, it's much more difficult for authoritarianism to create these such a strong divisions inside the community or between nations. Here there are some suggested readings that I've listed. Some there are sources that I've used, and other are interesting readings that are still related to this concept of history used to justify political violence. And so that's all. If you want to explore research or fact-checking further, if you have something that you want to share, for example, a personal project, I'd be happy to know it. And so here there are my contacts.
Thank you so much, Chiara. That was really an amazing presentation. And I see that already we have more than 10 questions. on Slido, which is great. For those of you who still didn't have the opportunity to ask their question, you can use the QR code or go to slido.com and use the code disinfo. We have quite some time to address questions, so let's start from the first one that I see on the screen, which is, does it make sense historically to speak of a pan-Slavic identity? This is a strong narrative used by Russian disinformation.
The problem is always to understand that historical narratives can be used in different ways. The pan-Slavic identity could be it could be considered true if we consider the connections between peoples, the connections in relation to culture. The problem is always when we use this narration to justify an aggression towards other people, that they want to find enemies, because there are of course there are similarities between the Slavic countries, but this doesn't mean that this is it's not necessary that it is a way to go against other people who are not Slavs. This is the problem, because of course we can find similarities, but the problem is always when it's a way to justify violence.
Of course. Thank you. Moving to the next question. So you focus in your presentation on authoritarian regimes, but you also have examples on how democracies weaponize history and where the threshold of legitimacy stands in this practice.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes, I focus mainly on authoritarian regimes, because especially the Nazi history is one of my biggest field of research. So I'm more an historian, so this is an exception, the example from Russia, because it deals a lot with the Second World War. That is a topic that I know very well. So this is why I've included, even if it's a contemporary topic. Of course, there is manipulation of history also in democracy, and this is interesting because the more democracy is weak, the more are how to say, the push is towards a less democratic society, the more are the manipulation of history. So yes, of course, there are examples also in the readings that I've suggested, the readings that I've listed at the end. There are some books that deal with it.
All right, thank you. All right, people want examples. Can you provide additional examples of other territorial myth in addition to, yes, there was the folk ohne Raum and the Raum ohne Volk used in modern conflicts. Maybe one.
Well, this is, if we want to stay to the idea of folk ohne Raum and Raum ohne Volk, even if maybe later I'll give also another example. But I think it's very interesting to understand this kind of mentality, because the idea of Raum ohne Volk, this is something that we can find in general in the European colonization in the past, because for the European mindset, it was very difficult to understand a society that was not structured in a state, but it was a tribal society. So in the past, the European powers thought that a lot of lands were with no people, even if there were people, but just because they were tribes. But for them, tribes were not a real they were not nations, they were not states, and so for them it was an empty space. And this is something very important to understand how and why the colonization worked in these places. Also because a lot of studies related to anthropology they are recent. They are something that became more common after the Second World War, also in relation to understand how it was possible this violence that it was in the Second World War. And also something that I think it's worth mention, a lot of information that we have on the how the identity national identities works and how are born. These are a field of study that originated especially after the Second World War, because they wanted to understand if really our identity is so strictly connected to a race, to something biological, or instead if culture plays a more important role. And so, in fact, a lot of information that we have now, we have it to studies that are recent. And so 1 century ago, for example, historians or archaeologists couldn't access to this kind of information. Also, maybe because they wouldn't have anyway the right mindset to accept it.
Thank you. All right. Now, on a more positive note, for an example, are there examples of successful resistance to historical distortion that you can share with us?
Yeah, for example, in relation to the Second World War, that, as I said, it's something that I know better. I think about how the Nazism tried to in a sort destroy the Polish identity, because they wanted to colonize this territory. And something that is not so well known, but it had a huge impact on this place, was that some Nazis wanted to believe to find in the Polish population people who in fact were Aryans, who were Germanic. Even if they consider themselves Polish, they said, no, you are Germans because you have specific traits, you certainly have some genes that are similar to us, so you are German, even if you consider yourself Polish. And this is also something very interesting and also dramatic, that it's not so well known from a broad public, that also some children, babies, were taken from Poland to Germany because maybe they were orphans, and they grew up not knowing their origins, because they were considered of Nordic race, and so their place was not Poland but Germany. And so I think that a successful resistance to this kind of ideology was Poland, because even if both Germany and also the Soviet Union tried to destroy their identity, killing the intellectuals, tried to destroy their culture, but anyway, they were able to resist this violent aggression, and Poland is still with us. So I think this is a positive example of resistance.
Definitely, that's a good one. The Poles are tough guys. Okay, so what role does hate speech play in transforming historical grievances into dehumanizing narratives against specific groups, leading to more violence and even genocide?
But I think it's fundamental, because we've seen how important in all these examples is the dehumanization of the enemy. And so they always try to find the most terrible stories that talks not to our mind but to our fears. And so yeah, definitely hate speech is fundamental in these kind of narratives. And yeah, it's strictly connected. And unfortunately, I think that also in our contemporary society, we can see how these hate speech can sometimes be linked with historical hates, and what always surprised me is the desire to show that the enemy has always been evil, and this is something that it's really interesting because it proves how it's important for them to show a very simple contrast. We are good, and then they are them there who are evil.
Of course, us versus them logic. So I see on the screen a comment more than a question, which is colonialism has similarity as well, which popped up during your presentation. Of course, this is something that you even mentioned in one of the prior replies about the people without land and land without people, and how colonialism really played into that. The perks of being a moderator is that I get to highlight questions. So this is why you see the first one in pale blue, because I really love this question, which is thinking about a trend some time ago. I remember these of asking people how often did they think about the Roman Empire. That's also a period of time that has been very much instrumentalized in modern times. Can you speak more about that? Yes, please do.
Yeah. Yeah, this is an interesting question for me because the other main field of research for me is the Roman Empire is ancient Rome. So this is a good question for me. Yes, of course, but I think this is more a fashion, this kind of trend about how often do you think of the Roman Empire. It's true that the Roman Empire has always been instrumentalized by everyone, by the far right, the far left. Everyone want to have a connection with the Roman Empire, but this is so broad, the connections, that I think it's true. Some people want to have the right on this period, but it's a period so well known, and there are so many studies on it that I think it's more difficult to instrumentalize it because it's a very well known period. And so, of course, some now we can see, especially the right, want to use the Roman Empire as to justify their own politics. But this is interesting also, doing a comparison with the Nazi regime, because they in the Nazi ideology, the Romans were a Nordic race. So in fact, they were relatives. But this is interesting that they had they admired the Roman Empire, but still they didn't love it so much, because even if they tried to manipulate history, they were aware that it was something that was not so easy to present as a pure race, and because they know that there was the reality of the Roman Empire, and also that the way that the Romans ruled their empire was totally different from the idea that they had to have a colonization based on yeah, also on extermination of other people. Romans invaded other lands, but they integrated the elites of these territories. This is interesting when we do a comparison on what, for example, the Nazis did in the Eastern Europe, because there were some elites, some people who wanted to be part of the Nazi regime, but the Nazism didn't allow them to do it, because they were so absorbed by the idea that they were inferior races that they could never absorb these kind of elites. And this was a very weak trait of their rule, and so yeah, I think everyone wants to use the Roman Empire, but is too well known to really manipulate to justify what they want.
Thank you. Very, very interesting. So in your research, have you studied the exploitation of the nostalgia of the past, the false idea that the past was better, in order to support specific ideologies and violence?
Well, this is very interesting. I haven't focused so much on this idea, but this is definitely something that came up from my research, because this is I think this is a real bias that we have as humans, to think that in the past everything was better, and everything was the races were pure. And yeah, this is definitely something that is recurring. And this is also why when people think that our identity, now that we live in a multicultural society, we maybe feel endangered our society. So we think that it's good to go back to the origin. But when we analyze the origins, we see that already from the prehistory, the mix of influences of ethnicity has always been. So there is never a moment when we were just us and we don't have connection with other people. And this is something, so it's really a myth of a moment when we were alone and we were pure and we had no connection with other people, because history is made by migrations and contacts with other people.
Of course, and we should always remember that. This is also, I think, a very interesting question, which is what is the role of education and state-approved textbooks in sustaining distorted versions of history, and what risks are there for EU democracies? I think, of course, also beyond EU, about how we like pamphlets and school books and Russian propaganda has been found distorting the war on Ukraine as a legitimate invasion, and how, of course, this has an impact on school children that are raised with this idea. But I'm sure that there are also more examples that you can provide.
Yeah, unfortunately, this is a very big problem, because when children learn this kind of version of the history, it's very difficult to have adults who can change their idea. This is why it's so important for every regime to control people, especially young people, because they want to shape their identity. And this is not something that happens only in Russia. This is something that happens in a lot of countries, not very democratic countries. And unfortunately, I don't have an answer, because when they are so the ideology is so ingrained in them from a very young age, it's very, very difficult. I think it's at some point it's not even possible to change it with rational ways. Maybe they should have a psychological support to help them to elaborate what they've learned. Also, because these people, when they are put in front of evidence, they refuse this evidence, because it's like destroy everything they've or always know. And so it's like destroy their own identity. And this is why for all these authoritarian regimes, they cannot accept to understand that in the past they had they did some crimes and they did something bad, because for them is accept it is something like to destroy who they are. And so this is why they refuse the evidence, and they try in every way to attack the ones who are highlighting it. As for us in Europe, at the moment, I don't think, even if it's not really my field of research, I think there is less this kind of danger. But we absolutely need to always be aware of this danger, also because at the moment the school is free, but who knows, maybe in the future there will be guidelines that already, in Italy there are already some guidelines that, for example, they very strict guidelines to how to deal with the term of anti-Semitic. So it's more and more complicated to deal with some complex topic, also because we've seen the reality is very, very complex, and we cannot just create a good versus evil narrative. This is very simple, and we would be very happy if the world is just good versus bad people, but it's not like this. And if we cannot have the freedom to have an independent research and an independent and free discussion, it's very complicated. And so I hope that the situation won't worsen in the future.
Of course. Right, we spoke about hate speech before and nostalgia of the past and many different features, let's say. Now the next question asks about the role of conspiracy theories in historical revisionism to justify real-world violence against certain groups.
Yeah, I think this is strictly connected also because you've seen this idea of ethnical replacement. This is a real contemporary conspiracy theory that there is a theory that say that there is a plan to ethnically replace the people in Europe, and this is a very common and yeah, a common theory among the far right. And so of course this is strictly connected. And so unfortunately it's true there are, and I also know that it's very difficult to deal with the people who believe in these theories, also because people who believes in conspiracies, they feel there is again this idea of a sense of belonging, because these people think they are people who understood the reality against other people who are all corrupted by other powers who are just too stupid to see the reality. And so it's very difficult to have a dialogue with them because they don't want to see the evidence and the truth, also because this way they can feel they are special because they see the world and the other no. And so there is like a different group that have the truth. And so it's not just to have so it's especially complicated to deal with people who believe in conspiracies.
That's true. And if I may add, it just made me think that like during the our annual conference, I had the pleasure of moderating a panel, and one of the speakers from the Center for the Study of Organized Hate, he brought research about the, among other things, the spread of the great replacement theory among Indian diaspora communities. This is something that, I mean, I usually tackled from the EU perspective. We hear a lot about the European far-right parties, how they weaponize this sort of narrative, but it's incredible that maybe even like with the globalization and the internet, these narratives do travel across the world, and there are conspiracies that do resonate with many different communities, unfortunately. I will end with a final question before we wrap up. I will just read the first one that I see on screen. Isn't there some sort of overlap today between the internal and external enemies that you mentioned? Someone from the audience asked about the example of the US. I assume that, yes, this is one, but there are also others. And yes.
Yeah. And I think it's very interesting when we think of this idea of internal enemies to highlight also the supporter of these internal enemies, because for authoritarian regimes or democracies, but with the people who don't like so much democracy, there are internal enemies, but are very dangerous also the people who support these groups. So, for example, if the internal enemies are considered the migrants, could also the I don't know, the left or non-profit organization, non-governmental organization are considered enemies because they are helping these so-called internal enemies. And this is why organizations like Médecins Sans Frontières or Emergency or Amnesty International are so constantly attacked by regimes because they, in their mindset, they are helping enemies that are destroying the community and the nation. And so, yes, definitely there are connections not only in the USA, but also in Europe and in a lot of other countries.
All right. Thank you so much, Chiara. This has been really, really enlightening, I think, for all of our attendees. We are running out of time, so I will now wrap up. I would like to truly thank you on behalf of the EU DisinfoLab team. I would like to thank as well our attendees for staying with us until the end. And I would like to thank my colleague Anna Romero for making this webinar possible behind the scenes. Um, we are sure that you really collected a lot of food for thought on how history and its misuse has a way of coming back around and still makes sense nowadays, what we encountered in the past. A recording of this webinar will be available soon on our YouTube channel and website, together with all our previous webinars. Looking at the future ahead, we have more webinars coming. On the 21st of November, we will learn more about Ano Dialog, the Russian sanctioned entity that is behind many disinformation campaigns. And on December the 4th, we will speak about a new strategy for the information space in the wake of the US withdrawal, very timely topics. In case you haven't done that yet, I urge you to keep up with all EU DisinfoLab updates and relevant updates from our community through our newsletter. It's bi-weekly. You can easily subscribe to it on our website. And at the end of this webinar, you are going to be presented with a feedback questionnaire. Please rate us and also suggest future topics. We're always on the lookout to learn more from this amazing community. I thank once again everyone. I wish you a good rest of your day and your week, and we will be in touch soon. Goodbye.